Hello out there, Ivy podcast listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in to what is the latest episode on the Ivy podcast, all focusing around female empowerment. I am your host, Angela Alberti. I have the awesome privilege to sit down with many leaders across the board, and more recently, some really, may I say, badass ones at the top of the female professional chain. And that is certainly the case today. I'm sitting with Megan. Megan, can you give the audience a brief intro on yourself?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you. My name is Megan McCann. I am the CEO and founder of McCann Partners. We are a Chicago-based IT recruitment firm with a national footprint. I also co-founded an organization called ARA, which aspires to attract, retain, and advance women in technology.
Wow. And, it is truly a privilege to sit down with you. We're going to hop into McCann and ARA a little bit later. I'd love to hear a little bit more around your background. I think I've said this before in many different episodes, but staffing and recruiting is an industry no one grows up wanting to be in. It's an industry that finds you and sucks you into this vortex. How did you land yourself into this space? And also, what prompted you to start McCann?
You are so right. I literally fell into IT recruitment. So I attended college in Ohio, a liberal arts institution by the name of Wittenberg. And throughout my 4 years, worked my way through college by working in the admission office and began doing recruitment work and found that I really enjoyed it. So I ultimately graduated and stayed on at Wittenberg to work in the admissions office, did onshore recruitment across the United States in a couple different locations, and then also did international recruitment for them. And ultimately, after being in Springfield, small town in Ohio for a number of years, decided I wanted to make my way to the big city and I'm dating myself now, started applying for jobs in advertisements in the Chicago Tribune, found a small quarter-sized ad for a recruitment position in IT. Had no idea what I was getting myself into. It was a means to an end. I wanted to get to Chicago, so starting to work for an IT recruitment firm was a great way to kind of parlay what I had been doing and also give me an opportunity to learn. Never anticipated that decades later I would still be in the space, right. But I really just fell in love with it. I fell in love with it because it is such a changing industry. It continues to be a very dynamic industry with just new trends. Certainly all the changes over the last couple of years with remote work becoming even more prevalent, but just the technology itself. Not being a technologist, it was interesting to stay kind of up to date and on task with what's happening in the marketplace. And that always has been a great challenge to me. And ultimately, I love connecting people. And I think we all have superpowers. And one of my superpowers is seeing those connections and making them very quickly. And that has really served me well in the IT space and in the recruiting business.
Oh, that's fantastic. And
thank you.
That moment for you where you're like, okay, you know what? I'm going to do it on my own. What was that like for you?
Oh gosh, there were a series of events that happened that were kind of like a domino effect, which ultimately made me say, this is the time to go on my own. And interestingly, I can't say that I had always thought about entrepreneurship. It just sort of happened to me. And it first happened when I co-founded a staffing firm, which ultimately we sold before I started McCann Partners. And at the time, the two gentlemen who were starting the firm came to me. They were individuals that I had worked with for a number of years. They were mentors, and they said, hey, we're doing this. Would you be interested in joining us? And I jumped at the opportunity. Didn't even think twice about it because I knew it just was the right thing. It felt in my gut like the right thing to do. My family wasn't as accepting at first, if I'm honest. They're like, you're going to do what? Because sometimes entrepreneurs breed entrepreneurs, and that was not the case in my family, right? Yeah. But ultimately took the leap, had a wonderful run, was a lot of ups and downs. You know, it was the dot-com bust, it was 9/11. So we had lots of twists and turns before we ultimately had an opportunity to sell. The company was Geneva Technical Services. And I stayed with the new leadership for a couple of years and then ultimately decided I wanted to go on my own. And it just really was one of those days I woke up in the morning. It was a day where at day's end I had incorporated and then ultimately left about 45 days later to officially start McCann Partners.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, kudos to you. I know that's a big leap of faith, and I know that, you know, personally, I've been through that position, and I remember when I had the opportunity to co-found a company, and just listening to my mom, and I'm going to try to do the accent, but she said, "No, no, no, mija, no, go back," and she's referring to the bigger company, to go back and do the safe route, and just the courage it takes to make that decision is really the biggest step to take.
It is, and I think sometimes if you can't take a chance on yourself, who can you take a chance on, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so, you know, it's not easy. There's fear and imposter syndrome and uncertainty. And there's also, for every kind of challenge to it, there's also this like beautiful other side of it, right? So there's, you know, for every challenge or negative, there's always a positive. And so for me, being able to do the work I love, but also then spend time, energy, resources, working on other things that are equally as important to me, that impact recruiting, for example. So diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, all of those things, which are so central to me as a human and important to me as a human. Having your own business, I found, allowed me to channel my energies a little bit different. And that to me has been the greatest win of going out on my own, other than building a remarkable team. I've got an amazing team that I thank my lucky stars every day. I can't tell you how many times I've written in my gratitude journal of the pride and gratitude I have for the team that has become McCann Partners.
Wow. Wow. Well, kudos to the team over there. That's really inspiring to hear about. And, you know, just segueing through that, you've had a chance to see how this industry has grown, especially the IT space, considering like your example of how you applied for your first job. I think it was like, it's like a job board on paper, right? I mean, like you did that. So you've seen this industry evolve, and you've seen it evolve in the fastest growing industry in the history of the human race, which is technology. I'm curious to get really a lens behind what you've seen within the industry with IT tech talent. What's that been like?
I don't even know where to start with that question, if I'm honest, because there are so many like tentacles to the question, right? So if you just look at the process, to your point, of applying for jobs, changed dramatically over the last handful of years, right? If you look at the workforce as we know it in 2020 versus end of 2019, beginning of 2020, those 2.5 years have changed forever the trajectory of how we're going to show up for work. If you look at the skills gap, there's such a skills gap within IT. And when I say that, I mean the number of open requisitions to the number of candidates available. There's a gap that is there from a skills perspective, from a talent perspective. And so just even how are we addressing that? What are we doing? The rise in things like boot camps and training programs to re-educate, retool, redeploy professionals, all of those things have really dramatically changed. And then, you know, the other piece of it, I would say, if I look purely at the technology side of it, the notion of someone being a really good technologist, but not being that person that can be in a stand-up or be in a meeting and have a voice. You know, there was this notion that you could have a a really strong technologist that kind of sat in the corner and did his or her work. And that I don't think applies anymore, right? Because we have agile environments where we're working differently and we're interacting differently, and technology is integrated into the business, and business is working with technology in so many different ways than it did before. It was maybe a little bit more siloed before. So all of those things have changed. I think the profile of which clients or customers or companies are looking to hire technologists. And I would also argue that every company is a technology company today, even if the business of the company is not technology. They're leveraging technology in so many
100%
ways to, run their business day in and day out. And that is also dramatically different than it was when I first got into the business.
Yeah, and it really encapsulates what the vast amount of changes that we've experienced from the day in the life of a recruiter to the actual candidate they're servicing now. One of the things that, if you can just paint the picture of the skills gap that's there for maybe people outside of IT or IT talent, and furthermore, from a leadership perspective, knowing that you have a team that's constantly in the throes of such a competitive industry, how many closed doors does your team face day in, day out when it comes to trying to find candidates?
You have to be very resilient in this business, right?
That's right.
For so many reasons that, there's so many ups and downs to the hiring process. We're in the business of people. While we are servicing technology, we are providing people, and it is not a perfect project or product, excuse me. So you run into all kinds of situations, from counter offers to changing your mind to so many other interesting scenarios that have become prevalent in the industry over the last couple of years. Impersonation of one person showing up for an interview and another showing up when they've been accepted for a contract engagement. There's
Horror
just
stories out there, right?
Yes, there really are a lot of horror stories. So I think diligence, persistence, perseverance, resilience are all really important characteristics that anyone in the IT recruiting business needs, whether you are internal to an organization, hiring for the company itself, or if you are external supporting clients like McCann Partners does. And always just, I think one of the, very much like technology, actually, one of the arts of recruiting is being creative. The same holds true when you're creating product in technology, in my mind. So, no is not always the answer.
Right.
Someone gives you a no and you have to find a different route. And so using that creativity, thinking outside of the box, not letting no always mean no, and just kind of always going back at it with a different lens can be really, really helpful. If I were to talk a little bit about where I see the technology gaps, or the shortage of resources, I would say certainly in the application development space. I think some of that is predicated by changes in policy and legislation around visas over the last couple of years. And the increase in overall opportunities there. Security is another one that there's a great delta in terms of the number of openings to the number of available professionals in that space, probably because that continues to be a space that grows so vastly year over year, just with all of the changes there. So those are probably two of the places that I see the greatest need, and where the talent deficit is. And it's a conversation with clients and with candidates about getting creative, about how you can maybe retrain, retool someone that has really strong foundational skills and capabilities, but maybe just doesn't possess the intricacies of the domain, but that has the aptitude, the willingness to learn. And so it's, looking at and kind of determining if there are creative ways to go about hiring or promoting the talent that's in place to fill the gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And setting that, of course, that right expectation with the client on this is what the market is bearing. this is what you're demanding, but let's go back to the drawing board and see what we can do to offer a more immediate solution, because of course everyone needs something yesterday, right?
That's right.
One of the things that I thought was just fascinating when we were having our prep call, Megan, was how, you portray or see that the IT industry has really evolved itself in helping open up the door and the opportunity when it comes to diverse hiring. Can you talk through that a little bit more?
Yeah. If I were to tell you, I'll say 5 years ago, that 1 in 10 conversations touched on diverse hiring, that would probably be a true statement. And today I would say it's more like 9 or 10 out of 10 talk
Wow.
about hiring diversely. And I think it's interesting because it's such an evolving space, right? Organizations are looking at their diversity numbers. They're looking at how that impacts the bottom line, because there certainly are tons of studies, a lot of data that's out there that speaks to the value of diversity in the workforce, the diversity of thought, backgrounds, all of that. So I think that's one component of it. I also have noticed that the employees themselves, those that are part of organizations today, are really pushing for the work to be done. So it's no longer a matter of words. There needs to be action that comes behind it. And I think I've certainly seen over the last 2 years that continue to increase. It causes organizations, I think, sometimes to take a step back, be really intentional with their actions, trying to find, like one solution. There isn't a one size solution that works for every organization when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's so many different facets that you can look at the programs through the lens of your employees, through the lens of hiring, how you're ensuring that there is talent at the top of the funnel so that there's a better chance of diverse hiring at the bottom of the funnel, if that makes sense, or once you get to the final candidates. So I think that right now there's a lot of great momentum. There's still a significant amount of work that needs to be done, but I'm seeing progress. It's never going to be as fast as I would like it, or probably many of us would like it. But people are being more mindful in what they're doing, why they're understanding their why behind it. And if we keep moving in that direction, I hope we will continue to see change.
Yeah, or at least the generations to come will see a much different approach when it comes to the makeup of a workforce, the inclusivity, and how that's represented, I think, at a leadership level,
Absolutely.
which is hugely, it speaks volumes to how an organization can build itself around that.
Absolutely. But it has to be intentional, right? It just doesn't happen overnight. You have to actually put steps in place and metrics in place and allocate dollars to it. It's just not something that kind of manifests out of nowhere without intention.
Right. Well, and I love what you mentioned on how you open up the top of the funnel so that you can ensure when you get down towards the bottom, and maybe that type of precision really needs a surgical lens for you to appropriate and really successfully, hopefully, manage your efforts in such a campaign. But I'd love to hear more about, you've had the chance to see entrepreneurship from a couple of different lenses as now your sole entrepreneurship as a female. I'd love to hear your experience under that, especially maybe from a comparative lens, because in the previous company that you were with, it was with 2 counterparts. It wasn't necessarily, you out on your own. Can you walk us through what that experience has been like for you?
Yes, the word that comes to mind is humbling.
Yeah.
You can read and consume a lot of information, and it's also really different when you experience it firsthand. And so I had, when I first started, I had read about the difficulty of availability of funds for female entrepreneurs. My recollection is, when we went and applied for our line of credit, was kind of like, okay, check the box and you're done. And I did not have that experience when I applied for a line of credit when I first started my business. And it was challenging because in some respects, if I'm honest, it could have been a little bit of insecurity on my part of walking into that experience, not having ever had to walk into the experience by myself before.
Mhm.
But when I did, I felt very judged is the word that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Like really needing to defend the model of what I do as a staffing organization, really. And I tried to be very, if I'm honest, try to be very patient through the process, because I was hopeful that what I was experiencing was not a bias towards me because I was a female entrepreneur, but rather someone that just didn't understand the business of staffing and how things work. And what I mean by that is, in staffing, you could have someone else working on a client site for 45 days before you get your first payment,
Yeah.
sometimes longer, depending on the cadence of invoicing and so forth. And while we, as McCann Partners, will try to put with our clients terms that are agreeable to us, sometimes we have to accept their terms, which aren't always perfect for us, right?
Yeah.
And so you try to talk through that, and the pushback is, well, why do you do it that way? Why do you do it this way? Well, here's why. Like, if a person starts and I can only invoice monthly for the terms of this Fortune 500 organization, they will have been on billing for 4 weeks,
4 weeks.
let's say,
Yeah.
with net 30 terms. So I could have paid for many weeks, 8 weeks, basically, of payroll and not got my first check. So that's why you need a line of credit, right? So I understood it, but it was like this education process of the banks and the people that I was working for until I found the right partnership. And then it was wonderful. And so that really surprised me. And I had hoped it wasn't true to what I had read and seen and heard of, but that was an obstacle for me. It took a little bit of navigating to get to the right bank that had the right lens for me. And I think that's an important, component to think through. And the other thing I just would say in general with entrepreneurship is it's a journey, and it is not a sprint. It is a marathon. And so you have to pace yourself. You have to figure out what your North Star is, have some planning and goals, have accountability partners. I think that's the other thing that has really served me as an entrepreneur well, is having those. Yes, they can be mentors, personal board of directors, coaches. They can come in many forms just to help me hold myself accountable to what I'm trying to achieve, and to sometimes push me in areas that aren't my strengths, right? And being an entrepreneur does not mean that you know it all, have all the skills to do it, right? You also have to then surround yourself with people that can help you achieve what your vision is. And so being really mindful of that, I think, is also really, really important. And it's not something I think I talked about or learned about before I actually started my own firm.
Yeah. And think about that lingering thought that you now have a staff around you. And this is where, for me, at least personally, I feel like there's the staff that knows a lot more than you do, right? And then,
Thankfully, honestly, thankfully.
and then you're like, imposter syndrome kicks in. Am I even supposed to be doing this? But far and away, what was more eye-opening, and I hate to say this, but least surprising for me, was hearing on how you needed to tie in the most critical element of you lifting off, and that's cash, because you know that you need a lot of cash in this industry to make it work. And it is one of those things that I say not surprising, because 2% I think is the amount of VC dollars that actually get allocated to female founders. And that is a statistic that just blows my mind. It gives me goosebumps, but not the good ones.
Yeah.
And it's, I guess, something refreshing to hear that your perspective, you went through that, and that was a struggle on your end. So thank you so much for sharing that. And it's amazing to me to know that you're doing, or at least you're playing your part and try to be the change within your own industry. And I want to talk about ARA now and how that organization was founded and was started. Can you give us some background?
Yes. probably, this is where it all gets a little bit gray because we lose track of time in some instances.
Right.
So years ago, I was at a networking dinner with a few folks, and ultimately we were a handful of, maybe 5 women in a rather large group of men. And at the end of the evening, this was, again, I'm going to date myself, back when you were still able to smoke in restaurants. And so at the end of the evening, most of the gentlemen that were part of the group kind of were bellying up to the bar to have a cigar and a scotch or a whiskey.
Right.
There are many women that enjoy cigars, scotch, and whiskey. So that is not the point of the story. We just realized, gosh, we are on the periphery of this entire group as a group of about 5 women, and kind of felt like it really wasn't a great fit for us from a networking and support perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started something called the Chicago Executive Women's Networking Group Dinner. And it started with a very small group, 3. It grew over the years. And ultimately, there's probably about between 600 and 800 women the last time I looked that had been to the dinners and been part of our community since our last dinner in 2019. And what happened is we just came together to support one another. The idea was getting in a room. It was not about selling. It was truly about networking and helping and supporting one another. So from those conversations, we kept coming back to the dinner every quarter. We would usually have between 75 and 85 women, depending upon the size of the room that we were, we had the dinner in. And the same conversation kept coming back again and again and again. And it was, where are all the women? Where are they going? They're not coming back from maternity leave, or if they've served the country, they are leaving in droves because they don't feel comfortable. We're not seeing the numbers rise in the leadership seats. So what can we do about it? And ultimately, that is how ARA came to life. ARA stands for Attract, Retain, and Advance Women in Technology. And so the basis of our organization is to support women through mentorship. We initially started through one-to-one mentoring, but the group has grown so significantly. It's greater than 8,000 women at this point across a couple of markets within the United States. And so we moved to an event model where we allowed for open conversation, dialogue, learnings from people that had traveled before us in our shoes, hearing from our allies in the space to understand how we can continue to support women feeling welcome and having champions and advocates in the tech sector. And that's what we're doing. COVID, I think for many years, we'll have a, trace back to things changing because of the last 2 years and the impact of the pandemic. But COVID for ARA was really interesting for a couple of reasons. One, certainly we had kind of been siloed by market in terms of bringing people together. So Chicago had Chicago events, New York had New York events, and so on. COVID hit, everything's remote. So we were able to bring the community together across the United States. And it also opened up an opportunity for us to have folks from across the United States speak and contribute, which was wonderful. The other thing that happened in 2020, at the height of Black Lives Matters and George Floyd's death, we realized that there was a call to action for ARA to do something to support underrepresented communities outside of women because of everything that was happening across the United States. So we came together and put together an allyship series in partnership with Chicago Chi-Tech Academy, Chicago Tech Academy, IC Stars, which is a workforce development training program, and then Black Women in Science and Engineering. And our mission was to leverage the platform of ARA to bring really difficult conversations to the forefront as a way of being an ally to others and still amplifying the voices of the women that we support, many of whom were being impacted by everything that was happening.
That's incredibly inspiring, Megan, and I can't even begin to tell you how much I commend what you guys have done and the efforts that you've made to expand your reach behind or beyond the females that are associated with your group. As a fellow female who came from a lower income background, thank you for what you guys are doing.
Well, you're welcome, although I don't feel like we've done enough yet, right? And at the end of the day, it was I was scared. I still am, as much as this topic is so important to me. I don't always get it right. Like my intention is always good, but my execution is not always perfect. And I definitely felt that way when we started the series in 2020. It was emotional. It still is emotional. I mean, everything that is happening in our communities and continues to happen in our communities across the United States, trying to find a way to make change that will have an impact, and do it the right way is not an easy task. Thankfully, listening and learning has helped direct the efforts, and I believe it will continue to help direct the efforts, but there's still a lot of work to be done in the space to support women and other underrepresented groups.
That's fantastic. And, not often do I hear about, and this is somewhat pivoting, but the role that the intermediary, the McCann agencies of the world play when it comes to a company or the end client, the enterprise organization's initiatives behind their DE&I and B strategies. And I know that you guys have probably really been at the forefront of that just based on what I've seen with the leadership. Can you shed a little bit of light on maybe some of the conversations that you guys have with clients and looking to align your recruiting strategy with their initiatives?
Yeah, it's interesting. Every client is so different, right? And every program, depending on how the organization is shaped, is run very differently. And so, our goal is we want to align with companies whose values align with ours. That always feels genuine when you're doing the work, right? So if someone is really committed to expanding the footprint within the organization of diverse candidates, we want to help them. That is integral to who we are as an organization. And even if you just look at, some of our measurements over the last handful of years, we make a very concerted effort to bring diverse talent to our clients. We want the best candidate to get the job, but we again feel if you can fill the funnel at the top with more diversity, then you can have it stand a better chance of impacting the bottom line of those numbers. So 70 greater actually than 70% of our placements since 2020 have been diverse candidates. Very mindful, meaningful on our part. And we really just work to understand what's important to the client. And then the education piece, to your point, certainly is around how you can build more diverse talent pipelines. What does your recruiting and interview process look like, right? There's the statement that you cannot be what you cannot see. And I think that holds true for anyone that's going into a job search or a career pivot. If you don't see something at a certain level, it's hard to know if that will be available to you. And so, we always counsel organizations that if you don't have it at that level, what can you do to bring it into the interview process? And how can you be very genuine and open? We know that this is an area that we're working on, but these are some of the actions that we're taking. And, as a job seeker, I believe people are understanding and accepting of that information when you share it. But if you aren't sharing it and kind of hiding behind the numbers, sometimes that can be problematic. So we're having honest, candid conversations like this with our clients, and then working to support them in a very genuine way through reaching out to diverse groups. We've built partnerships with different organizations, different sites, posting sites, and so on to help us drive that diversity.
Yeah, and I think if you cannot be what you cannot see is what, something that, by the way, I am stealing and taking because it's very powerful. And super tactful in the approach that you guys take, highly consultative as part of the added perk. And hey, we're submitting these candidates, but this is the best approach that you guys need to take. I want to pivot back to one of the points that you made about Ara and the foundation behind the organization and just building a form of mentorship. It's been critical for me in my own growth. Can you share a little bit of a personal testimony of what mentorship has done for you and your career?
Oh gosh, I would not be in the seat I am today without mentorship, and it has come in so many shapes and sizes, right? Anecdotally, when we started ARA, there was we learned a lot really quickly with particularly with the one-to-one matching, and mentorship can come in all shapes and sizes, right? Traditionally, as a market or as an industry, as a country, we look at mentorship where it's up and comer to senior level, but mentorship can come reverse mentoring. It could be junior to senior. It can be peer mentoring. So when I just look at that foundationally, I learn from everyone every day in some form or fashion, from my team, from people I really reach out to as true mentors, or a personal board of director advisors, whatever you want to call them. But it has certainly lifted me in ways that I hope that I have been able to give back to others, because it's been so valuable to me. And I would say probably one of the greatest takeaways from mentorship for me is that sometimes people can see things in you that you can't even see in yourself, and you need to accept, although challenging at times, the mirror of what the mentor is trying to share back to you, because there is imposter syndrome and there is doubt, self-doubt, right? There is, I was chatting with a client, a gentleman actually, who was like, I didn't realize that I was suffering from imposter syndrome until we just did our 360, and I got all this amazing feedback, and I've been beating myself up thinking I wasn't doing a good job or enough. So I think we all suffer from it, and we need to, lean on mentors to help navigate what that looks like, because it surely has served me tremendously well.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have said it more perfectly myself. And I think you are right. One of the, themes that I've noticed in having the opportunity to interview so many wonderful leaders across the board is their constant yearning to continue learning and learning from the people alongside them. And you are certainly not an exception to that. So thank you for sharing that insight. I want to get somewhat philosophical as we're wrapping up today's show, which makes me a little bit bummed out because you've been just a ray of light to speak to today, Megan. But what do you think, or what do you hope to see in the future of work? We hear a lot about it being a part of this ecosystem, the future of work this, the future of work that. What does it mean to you?
Equity, number one. Flexibility, I think, is the other thing that I want us to continue to embrace, because I've seen the benefit over the last 2 years of having some flexibility and what that means to people.
Right.
Particularly with other responsibilities. Like, we all have different responsibilities, whether it be childcare, or pet care, or elder care, or self-care, right? Like all of it, being able to prioritize those a little bit differently. If we as individuals are healthy and we feel like we can take care of those other responsibilities, I think we show up better to everything, to our families, our friends, our work, our colleagues, all of that. So I think that's a really important piece. I want us to continue from a workforce development perspective to get creative, to think outside the box, to understand what truly is necessary from a skill perspective when hiring versus what can be trained or taught. Those are two very different things. If you have a really strong candidate who has great aptitude, a proven record of learning, a proven record of performance, but maybe doesn't have a particular skill set from a technical perspective, don't rule that person out. Look one layer deeper to how they can be productive members of your team, or look at your team and see who can be moved around with a little bit of training and assistance. I think that's critical. At some point, or perhaps it's on a company basis, or even team by team basis, what is the effectiveness and this is going to be controversial, but what is the effectiveness of a 5-day week versus a 4-day week? What is the effectiveness of a 32-hour week versus a 40-hour week? Like, what does it mean, and how can we give the best to our employees and get the best from them because we've done that in support of them? I think that's really important. And I would be remiss if I did not mention diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and continuing to change the footprint of what that looks like for an organization, of how the company's employees feel as an employee, regardless of how they identify, regardless of their age, their upbringing, their education, the color of their skin, their religion, their gender, all of those things. So I think that goes back to equity across the board, including pay parity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was wonderful. Meg, thanks for sharing that. As we're wrapping up today's show, what do you read? What are you into that helps you stay up to date? What are some of those resources that you rely on in terms of, I think, in this very informative digital age that we are in, we need to be super mindful of the diet that we consume mentally. And I try to be mindful of that when I find myself watching something like on Netflix. I'm like, you know what? I need to turn it off. This isn't good. But I know I'm going off here, but I'd love to know, what are some of those things that you like to tap into that help relate to the overall content diet on what you are absorbing?
That's such a fascinating question, because, we live in this world of social media where there's so much that can be consumed. And I get a lot from social media. However, I will tell you that over the last 2 years, I've had to dial some of that back just in terms of the reading, because it's polarizing sometimes in terms of beliefs and everything. So I try to really be mindful of going to sources that are informational, factually driven, right? So studies from McKinsey or Gartner or, those kinds of locations, right? Where there's always bias, and there can always be bias in certain reportings, right? But trying to find the information that I feel is non-biased.
Because you're ultimately in a position to pose and form your own opinion around that.
Right. Absolutely. And I also think sometimes, my team has joked like, hey, did you know this happened? I'm like, no, I don't watch the news. And they're like, you don't watch the news? I'm like, I don't watch the news. Because it can pull you in, and certainly we are recording this, and I'm not sure when it's going to air, but we're recording this during the week of the 4th of July, where here in our own backyard, there was a tragedy that happened in terms of the shooting, right? And I had to turn it off. I couldn't, it's not because I want to know about it, because I want to know how I can support it, but it's so heavy. For me, you have to digest it in pieces and synthesize it to know how to take action to do something to support those that you want to support, right? So it's a really maybe non-direct answer to your question, but I pick and choose for sure. And I always ask for recommendations from people that I know. I listen to podcasts. Those would be some of the things. My own digests from professional organizations that we're a part of that can give some good feedback in terms of trends that are happening. Again, a little bit more non-biased, more fact-based or survey-based, which again, opinions come into that, but at least hopefully the content gives me a good foundation for making decisions or offering opinions.
And, just to give a quick shout out to the audience, you were, I believe it was last year, the top 40 people to follow within D&I for staffing, or SIA's formalization of the people to follow within this movement. So kudos to you. I know that was a big accomplishment, and it certainly shows after having this conversation with you today, Megan. I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us and our audience as well. I always say this as I wrap up a podcast, because time is honestly the most valuable tool that we can give one another. So thank you guys for spending some time, and thank you, Megan. Where can our audience find you?
Sure. I am on LinkedIn, and so feel free to reach out there. On Twitter, my handle is Megan P. McCann or McCann Partners. So please feel free to reach out. And then the website is www.mccannpartners.com. So please feel free to reach out if I can answer any questions, provide any insight or inspiration. And just thank you for having me, giving me the platform. The work I do is my passion. It fuels me, gets me out of bed every morning. And so being able to share that journey with you and others is a great honor. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. And that feeling is reciprocated fully. But thank you for being on the show. Thank you to the audience once again. We'll catch you guys on the next episode of the Ivy Podcast.